Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third edition of the Extra Point Podcast. This is Andrew Goldberg, as I guess your default host here. And, as always, we're joined by Adam Levin, and usually we're joined by Dan Schneier and Eddie Pascal, but they couldn't make it this week because of work obligations and everything like that. Of course, all of us work for Fox Sports, carrying various divisions, covering the various divisions of the NFL. Adam, how are you doing today?
Good. How you doing today, Andrew?
I don't know if you can hear it in my voice or my nasal capacities, but a little groggy. But hey, everyone deals with the same thing, so can't complain. It's a Friday. It's the weekend.
Yeah.
Time to relax. Time to just, I don't know, gain up on sleep. At least for me. I don't know about you.
I agree with you, and just for me, selfishly out here in Southern California, I don't know if you guys out there on the East Coast have been hearing, but usually it gets pretty hot in Southern California, especially where I live in the Valley, like towards this time of year. But it's been brutal in the triple digits like all week, and so finally, it's not 102 or whatever degrees today, so that's nice, and it should be hopefully a cool weekend. Looking forward to that.
Okay, this is probably the one and only time that we can brag about having better weather than you. Because up here in Jersey, it's like really, really nice. It's probably high 60s, very low humidity, like a little
Oh,
wind. It's like really, really nice. And this is the only time I get to brag about being better set than Southern California in terms of weather. So I don't feel bad for you.
yeah, well, you shouldn't. It's been like 102 to like 107 like all week except for today. Thank God.
Yes, it's like the Death Valley. But anyway, speaking of not feeling bad for people, Roger Goodell was on earlier today around 3 p.m. Eastern. I would say 12 o'clock Pacific by you, of course, because you guys are 3 hours behind. Anyway, after being in, I don't even know what he was in, either a bunker, of epic proportions. Someone locked him in NFL headquarters. He was, on a private island somewhere. I don't know what it was. But while all this Adrian Peterson news was happening, with the Vikings activating him, then deactivating him, then, you know, activating him again, and then deactivating him again, Greg Hardy getting deactivated, Jonathan Dwyer then coming out with another domestic abuse, and Jonathan Dwyer, then his subsequent deactivation, or I shouldn't say all three, but Greg Hardy and Adrian Peterson are now on this commissioner's exempt list, which no one really remembered about
Or
before, except Michael Vick was probably the only person to be on. Well, he was. I shouldn't say probably. He was after the Eagles had signed him and the dog beating incident. But he reemerges. He has his press conference. He gives his press conference, and I don't know if it really cleared anything up. I mean, a lot of these NFL players tweeted out while this was happening. And we're going to read a couple tweets before I go to you. We got Bears Brandon Marshall, wide receiver Brandon Marshall, who has his own history of domestic abuse and kind of, what is it? Not cognitive problems.
erratic behavior.
Yeah, he had his own
Borderline
problems to
personality
deal with.
disorder.
So he says what at NFL Commission is doing isn't easy. Former Packers running back Ryan Grant says anyone who thinks the press conference was going to be productive, shame on you. LOL. Torrey Smith said what Roger just said is the exact same thing that players say when they make a mistake and plead their case. Colts safety Darius Butler, this press conference is pointless. Former Cardinals Beanie Wells, a lot of, quote, we got it wrong, we didn't do this or that, quote, if you're the judge and juror, it's the best ability is accountability. Anyway, there's a lot more tweets. So, Adam, what did you think about this whole entire press conference, since we're fresh off it, about an hour and a half later?
I mean, it was just, more of the same. I mean, what do you expect? He was probably rehearsed all this stuff and probably went over it in his magical bunker that he disappeared to all week. Probably he probably went over it like 8 million times before. He probably knew the media was going to kill him, which they did, which they should have. Some of the questions they asked were right on point. And I mean, of course he's going to just give the same platitudes. He's trying to defend his job, and at the same time, he's also trying to defend the owners who hired him, who put in a lot of the rules. So, I mean, more of the same, and I'm just hoping, and we're going to talk about it a little more, but I'm just hoping, not even to wrap it up, but just to say, like, I hope some positive things come out of this debacle, because this has been just a mess for 2 weeks. Not like the NFL doesn't deserve to have it be a mess because they've screwed up, but this has just been a debacle, and hopefully some good things can come out. But to answer your question, I don't think anything's changed. I don't think he did anything radically different than we expected.
Yeah, I mean, I watched some of it, and I was watching all these highlights and everything, and I think the players are spot on in terms of saying, like, he's not really taking any accountability, which I guess we should have seen coming. He did take a little accountability, but he was using a lot of we's and everything. And I thought a couple, like, good points that came up were, I mean, one funny tweet was Chad Johnson saying dad is on every channel. I just thought that was kind of funny. Um, but it kind of didn't clear anything up. And it didn't really make anything worse. I think at this point, a lot of it is damage control. And, they talk, and I don't know if anyone had seen this, but Darren Rovell, the business insider for ESPN, and he basically just analyzes everything in sports. He said, or he broke the news initially this morning that the NFL is kind of like setting up a hotline for domestic abuse and making all
Yeah.
32 NFL teams and their personnel do 30-day domestic abuse training. So, who knows how far that goes, because I think I saw one interesting tweet as well from like Herm Edwards or somebody say that, the players that have good high moral character will listen and will not do it, and the people who need to hear this and actually change what they're doing will have it go through one ear and out the other.
That's very true. I mean, that's usually how it works, unfortunately, in life with anything, is the people who really need to hear it are the people who ignore it because they don't care and they're going to do whatever they need to do. Usually it's subconscious, but that's very true of life, and that's a good point raised by Herm or whoever sent that tweet.
Yeah, I probably should do a better job, quoting the tweet, but, oh well, it's kind of the idea that we tried to get across. But
The idea was good and very true.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I mean, going forward, was the NFL wrong in all this and how they handled it? Yes, and it's not just Roger Goodell. It was how the Minnesota Vikings did it. I mean, they were just comical in how they did it. The Carolina Panthers looked foolish because they had their owner, I think Jerry Richardson was his name. He was shouting about domestic violence, yet Greg Hardy, after being charged and convicted in all this, which is different from Ray Rice and everybody, because he was actually convicted for his actions in throwing his girlfriend on a pile of guns, automated weapons. And I don't know if you saw the OTL stuff, but that was pretty chilling to see. And, it was just like, there was a double standard, and then all of a sudden, once all these sponsors started getting pulled from the Vikings and everything like that, the Carolina Panthers was like, oh, maybe we should act on this and deactivate Greg Hardy. It wasn't like something that they should have done before. And we can probably credit TMZ. I mean, personally, I think they're the scum of the earth. But in this instance, TMZ actually created huge change, because if that video hadn't surfaced, I think we all would have been okay with Ray Rice getting a 2-game suspension for hitting his wife in an elevator, which is unexcusable no matter what the situation was. And then the same thing kind of happened with Adrian Peterson. Like, what happens if there was no video or anything like that? Adrian Peterson would have gotten, 4 or 6 games, and it would have been okay. Greg Hardy, who knows, same thing. Maybe he's still playing, but now with all this public outroar, we got this action.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, you're right. TMZ did the best job of exposing everything, and it just proved like how powerful video is, because we don't care this much if there's not that video. And then it was the timing of it that made it a perfect storm. First, you've got the Ray Rice thing, and then Goodell, did he or did he not lie? And then Adrian Peterson, out of nowhere, you get pictures about him beating his kids, and then everyone wants to relook into the Hardy thing, rightfully so, because he was the guy that could have gotten away with it. And luckily, we looked back and we said, no, wait a minute, this Greg Hardy guy, no, he needs to be lumped in here too. And yeah, it was a good thing because it brought a lot of attention. You know, I mean, we know, we've watched sports, like how many of these guys are always committed? I mean, Michael Crabtree before the Super Bowl when they lost to the Ravens, sexual assault, he plays the next day. It's like, how many times did these guys get away with murder because they're football players and the teams need them to win? It's like, this woke up the league, rightfully so. It needed to wake up the league, and I agree with you. Like, I think in all of this, the people who I think should be the most embarrassed are the owners. What are they doing? Putting their coaches and GMs out there? It's their organization. Get out in front. And then they only get out in front when their sponsors get pulled. Well, every entity that's that large, really all they care about is ratings and dollars. And luckily that spoke up because these owners finally got their act together. I mean, the Wilfs actually put their faces on a press conference when they were addressing Adrian Peterson, the two brothers who own the Vikings, rather than trotting out their GM or trotting out their football coach to speak about matters that really go above them, go above their pay grade. So, in all this, I think the owners should be just embarrassed with themselves. But, you know, whatever. They got together, panicked, and are at least doing some implements of change. And like I said, the good thing about this is we're getting to a point where we're fed up with this, which I'm happy about, because for too long this stuff would go on and it'd fall on deaf ears because the game is popular, people bet the game, and it's like, whatever, football's a machine. Societal stuff gets out of the way for football, and thankfully we took a stand and we're like, no, you know what, like, a little more important than wins and losses on a Sunday.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing that came out of this is the fact, I mean, outside of all the awareness that has gotten exposed because of at the NFL's expense, but what has happened, I think Roger Goodell mentioned it in his press conference today, was that the domestic abuse hotline, their calls were actually up 84%, and they're trying to help them now because they didn't have the volume to handle all the calls that are happening. And I think it's great that, you know, obviously we don't want abuse, but it's great that if someone unfortunately is abused, at least now this is kind of helping other women come out and say, like, hey, I was abused. And it doesn't have to be an NFL player, right? It's just
Right.
This isn't a football problem. This is a societal problem. This is not just something that says, oh, all football players are abusers. No, any single person is an abuser. It just so happens that right now in the NFL, the three most popular public figures are getting in trouble, which is driving the attention. There are still Wall Street employees who hit their wives, dentists, lawyers, just any walk of life. It's not exclusive to NFL.
There was a judge in Alabama. There was a judge in Alabama who got reinstated to the bench, and he's a horrible wife abuser. No. It's definitely, these guys didn't make up domestic abuse and child abuse. This is stuff that's plagued society, and our legal system has been screwing up domestic abuse from the beginning. It's not just the NFL that screws it up; the legal system does. So, yeah, it is good that we're shining a light on it all. Like, that's what I'm saying. Is like, it's not just the football players; it's just shining a light on problems that do need to be addressed, because you know what? You shouldn't hit a woman and you shouldn't abuse a child, and we should have a national debate about this. And, you know, maybe it's good that this came out because we've been having the national debate. And I know it's been centering on the NFL, but it's good to just have it out there because it is unacceptable. And I'm just glad that, you know, I don't necessarily like the social media mob mentality. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that it is good to see a lot of decent, rational people out there who are like, this is wrong, let's speak up about it. Obviously, the social media mob is another scary area that might be better for another episode or for another topic, but disregarding that, it is good that we're all collectively in on this.
Obviously, it is nice that, you know, at least some players are speaking out about this, even if there are former players or current players. But there is also just the trolls on Twitter who just say ridiculous things. I don't even know what it is, but they just, you know, everyone says ridiculous things no matter it's good or bad. Someone's just going to say something incredibly stupid, and that's what, you know, freedom of speech is, and that's what you get with it. But, you know, Twitter, Facebook, that's kind of propelled it to another level. So that was that for the off the field stuff. Let's get to on the field stuff because thankfully there was a little break last night. As comical as it was, when on Thursday Night Football we got a break to on the field stuff. Like I said, Atlanta Falcons versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We thought it'd be a little bit closer game than it actually was, right? I mean, Atlanta Falcons won 56-14. I don't exactly know what happens. And my prediction of Tampa Bay being a wild card team and Lovie Smith being Coach of the Year looks very, very laughable and and takes away the credibility of this Extra Point podcast immediately. So I'm very sorry about that.
No, I was never really a believer in Tampa Bay, not because of Lovie Smith. I think Lovie Smith is a great coach. I really do, especially with defense. And I think that Tampa Bay defense was really good. And so I liked them to be good once they got a different quarterback. I never bought into the Josh McCown thing. I'm like, I know he was good in Chicago last year, but come on, this guy was coaching high school football or youth football like the year before last year. So it's like, really, this guy is going to be your savior? And we haven't seen anything from Glennon that shows us that he's the man. I always thought Tampa Bay needed a quarterback before they were good. So I thought they would be like a bad team that would steadily improve. I didn't get why everyone was hyping them up. I'm like, really? They have no quarterback play? And this just proved it. And boy, oh boy, you talk about embarrassing. I mean, that thing was over 21-0 after the first quarter. And, just one guy alone in Devin Hester, the former Bear, ironically, playing across the field from his former coach there in Chicago, just having the game of his life. I mean, that was just lopsided to a T. And besides just improving what I thought Tampa Bay would be, which was like interesting, but, come on, not enough quarterback play to be great, it showed me that maybe Atlanta, maybe they're going to be up and down, that defense isn't the best. But Atlanta may be in the NFC South race. I mean, come on, they have Matt Ryan and Mike Smith, and say what you will about Mike Smith and even Matt Ryan, but other than last year, those guys have never had a losing season since they got together in 2008, and prior to them getting together in 2008, Atlanta was a franchise that never had back-to-back winning seasons. So I think last year was an aberration. I don't think they're going to be maybe a 12-win team, but I think they're going to be just fine this year, 9-7 maybe or something, but and that kind of proved it to me. Like, they're good enough to at least be a 9-win team.
Yeah, I mean, a couple good points I want to go off of there is that Josh McCown, like you had said, had been a quarterback coach for a high school football team. So he basically went the Brett Favre route and then came back from retirement, except isn't as good. And his record before that with the Arizona Cardinals was so bad. It was like 4-12 or something in mop-up duty and then in extended starts. And he had Larry Fitzgerald there, and he couldn't do it. I mean, it must speak to how great Mark Trestman's offensive game plan and philosophy was, and also how good Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey are wide receivers, because he just chucked it up to them. He put incredible numbers up, and he was the reason why Alshon Jeffrey just shot up the charts in terms of his productivity. The reason why I picked Tampa Bay was because I thought that they would kind of duplicate that in all the targets they had. Yes, they have rookies in Austin Seferian-Jenkins at tight end, Mike Evans at wide receiver, but they have really tall guys at all three positions. Doug Martin is a great running back in terms of his rookie year production, and then he got hurt last year. But, they had weapons there. Gerald McCoy's a beast on the defensive line. Same with Adrian Claiborne, who went out with a biceps injury. You got Levante David, who's one of the best, not only one of the best young linebackers in the game, but one of the best linebackers, period. And then you had Alteron Werner, who was a Pro Bowler last year, to go along with Deshaun Goldson, who's a huge free agent signing in terms of money, to go along with Mark Barron in the backfield. They just have talent all over the place. And, I think it's offensively where the problem is, because let's not forget, Lovie Smith went to the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman. And, being an NFC North fan, it's Rex Grossman. So, I mean.
Right. I agree with you. I mean, I like Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith, to me, wasn't the issue of why I thought they weren't going to be that good. I actually think Lovie Smith, once he gets the right quarterback in place will get that team to be good because he did a lot with nothing. I mean, like you said, that Bears team that went to the Super Bowl, I argue if that defense doesn't create turnovers the way they did, the NFC's not as weak as it was back in 2006, and you didn't have a guy like Lovie Smith setting the ship, that Bears team wouldn't have been 13-3. Like, he's a very good coach. But, yeah, to your point, I mean, I just don't think Josh McCown and Mike Glennon are going to help you win. I love what Tampa Bay has on defense. I love what they have on offense, that basketball team they have on offense. They just need a trigger man, that's all. That's, to me, is why the only reason why I thought they wouldn't be good and why I was always confused about why people thought they would be good, because I'm like, nah, not with those two as your trigger guys.
Yeah, and to be fair, Mike Glennon, he was a rookie last year, and he actually wasn't too bad. I mean, he wasn't incredible like Andrew Luck or Robert Griffin III or even Ryan Tannehill. He had 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He threw around 2,000 yards, I would say, but that was for a bad Buccaneers team. But I think the real story here, obviously, was Atlanta. I mean, we obviously learned that Tampa Bay is probably one of the worst teams in the league to go along with the Giants and the Jaguars and the Raiders. But, you know, Atlanta is actually, you know, this is the reason why everyone picked Atlanta to go to the Super Bowl last year, was because of all these weapons on offense. And then I think it's got to be frustrating for Bears fans to see Devin Hester be working to the offense so well, because we knew how good he was as a returner, but we didn't know, you know, we always thought he never really made an impact in terms of being a wide receiver or a cornerback with the Bears. Now he comes to the Falcons, and he looks like a stud. He kind of looks like Percy Harvin light. But do you think Devin Hester's a Hall of Famer?
Yeah, I do. I mean, he set the return touchdown record. He's very versatile. And I believe in a sport like the NFL, look, in the NBA, I think the qualification to be a Hall of Famer in the NBA is you've got to be really solid across the board, because the NBA is a sport all about stars, and some of the Hall of Famers in the NBA are some of the best athletes of all time. So you've really got to be consistent statistically, performance-wise, and with getting to the playoffs to get to be an NBA Hall of Famer. In baseball, you got to hit a numbers threshold. And in football, I think you just have to be really good at what niches you can fill, because it's such a position-reliant sport. And, yeah, I do think he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, look, like he's one of the most dangerous return men, if not the most dangerous ever. And we can see that when he's implemented well, he can be a real, real weapon. So, yeah, why not?
Yeah, I mean,
why can't he be a Hall?
I say yes, but like not as a lock, because I feel that he only touches the ball a very, very finite amount of times in a game. So he'll touch it, like, let's say 3 or 4 times. And his impact on the game can be so small in those 3 or 4 times. It's not like a running back or a wide receiver who get, you know, I don't know, however many targets a game. And then there's also the fact that when he goes up against the rest of the Hall of Famers and, like, you know, whenever he retires in like 10 years, let's say, he's going to be going up against, you know, running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, defensive linemen, cornerbacks. You know, he's going to be going up against guys who play 90 snaps a game. I mean, not 90 snaps, but like 70-something a game.
Well, because I was going to say, like, in terms of touching the ball, like, offensive linemen don't touch the ball, or defensive linemen, but they are engaged in more snaps than Devin Hester. You're right about that. I mean, I'm not saying he has to be a first ballot lock Hall of Famer, but eventually he can be Hall of Famer. I mean, a guy can be Hall of Famer. Why can't he?
Yeah, I think he will be, because he has the record, and he's probably only going, you know, for total kickoff/punt returns. Obviously, he broke Deion Sanders' record, who was in the building, and, you know, Devin Hester had that emotional interview after the game with him, because he had watched him in Miami. What was that?
I said on his end around rushing touchdown, he did the high step into the end zone in for Deion, because he knew Deion was in the building. Deion's old move where he used to high step it, primetime style. He did that on one of his touchdowns, which was like a fitting homage to
and
Deion. I thought that was
because it was on the punt return touchdown, which was the record breaker. That's when he did it, and he got flagged for it, but they were up like 35-0, so it was okay. Last note I want to talk to you about before we hit the other games this weekend. is the Atlanta Falcons, Matt Ryan. I think he's an elite quarterback. I think anyone would take him, but it seems like his play is very up and down. And, the first game he looked great against New Orleans. He put up a franchise or a career high, I think, or was it franchise record. Passing yards, 3 touchdowns to a big win over a big division rival. And then he comes back the next week against a very good Cincinnati defense. So you can't take anything away from Cincinnati. But he throws 3 interceptions and they get blown out. Then he comes back against Tampa Bay and looks like an all-world quarterback. So, I mean, I don't know if it's a consistency thing or it's the opponents he's playing. Obviously, he's a great quarterback, but how much of their success really lies on him for this season?
For this season, I think a lot. I mean, I think when he first got to Atlanta, 08, 09, 10, they were getting to the playoffs and winning and having winning seasons a lot because they were running the ball and asking very little of him. I think since 11, they've asked a lot more, and his consistency and performance has been more indicative of how good they can be, and I don't think this year is any exception. I think he really can make or break the team. I think I like him, but I think you're right. I mean, he can be very inconsistent. He's not very mobile, so when he plays a good defensive line like Cincinnati or San Francisco or Seattle, and we see with Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, these guys that are statues, D-lines like that, I mean, they all struggle because they can't move out of the way. Like, D-lines like that struggle against an Aaron Rodgers, against Colin Kaepernick, because those guys can move. But a statue like Ryan's going to be a sitting duck. So, but I do think also beyond just that, yeah, he can be very inconsistent. He can be really inconsistent, but he's still consistent enough to at least get winning, other than last year. And I think a lot of things went against him last year. Yeah, he usually can be consistent that they can have a winning record.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if he can bring them to a Super Bowl or win them a Super Bowl, I guess you would say, in the next 5 years. I would say that he comes very close, but I don't think he wins them a Super Bowl just because of the way he's been playing. Like, he has Julio Jones, Roddy White, now Harry Douglas, and Devin Hester. The running game's kind of ineffective, though, and it's like he has all these parts around him. He's getting paid a boatload of money that he deserves, but is he really, like, the expectation is I make you better, not put the parts around me to make me better. Don't get me wrong, you need to put parts around him, but at some point the quarterback and Matt Ryan has to step up and go, okay, I'm going to actually lead this group. There's nothing more we can do. Like, the years are ticking, especially with Julio Jones' contract coming up. Roddy White's career kind of winding down, especially with all these injuries he's getting. Steven Jackson only has a couple years left. He's been banged up the last couple of years since coming over to St. Louis. And their defense, because of the salary cap, they don't have many stars on it or just any effective players, really. I mean, they have some, but not a lot.
It's not a good defense.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that, Andrew. I mean, I, like you, am curious to see, like, if he can do it, because at some point he's going to have to be the guy that can do it, and I think time will tell. And I'm skeptical too. I mean, like I said, I like him, but I don't like him to the point where I'm going to put him in my top 5 ever. So yeah, I'm skeptical too, and I think the next 5 years will tell us a lot about how good he really is, whether he's just a very good game manager who can get you 9 wins a year, or whether he's the guy who can win you a Super Bowl.
Yeah, is he going to be Jay Cutler, or is he going to be, Tom Brady?
Right.
Extreme, kind of. But let's look ahead to the weekend before we end the podcast here. We singled out 5 games that we think are really important. So we can call this our top 5 games of the week to watch. So let's start with Green Bay and Detroit. AFC or NFC North rivalry, right? Okay, both teams are 1-1. Green Bay started the season off by getting trampled on Thursday night by Seattle Seahawks, and then they come back and win in, I guess you could call it touchdown gate, against the Jets. Detroit looks great against the New York Giants and the new offensive system. Everyone's really hyped up about Matt Stafford and Calvin Johnson, and then they come back and kind of lay a goose egg on a Carolina defense that doesn't have Greg Hardy. Granted, they are pretty good without him. And then Cam Newton's first game coming back from fractured rib. So in this matchup, I guess, what is the biggest thing? Are we like, who do you believe in more, Detroit or Green Bay in this game?
Oh, well, I mean, for the first time in many years, I don't know. I mean, slam dunk is usually you believe in Green Bay because Detroit's Detroit. They look great one week, bad the next week. They haven't. I mean, we all know they haven't necessarily been the best franchise the last 2 decades. So
Right.
they're a pretty easy team to be like, I don't know if I really believe in them. And
Right.
Green Bay's been such a constant that it's usually a slam dunk, but. Green Bay didn't look that good in that Jets win. I mean, I know it was the biggest comeback of Aaron Rodgers' career, but they were down 21-3 at home. And if that, debacle with the timeout doesn't happen, then the Jets tie that game up. I mean, let's be honest. That was not a great Green Bay win. That was pretty shaky. You have to be very scared if you're a Green Bay fan. So I really don't know. These are two terrible secondaries, two defenses that look, like all they're going to do is just hope that the offense can score enough points because they're not that good. And it's Stafford versus Rodgers, so I'll take Rodgers, and that offense is more consistent than the Lions can be, which that Lions offense can sometimes look explosive and then sometimes looks like Stafford's forcing stuff. But I'll go with the Packers just because they're usually the constant here, but I'm not saying that as confidently as I usually would because the Packers have not looked very good, even though they're 1-1.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, I know you're a Green Bay fan, and they won
And I
back
cover the division, too.
yeah, back in 2009. Obviously, you cover the division, so you know Detroit, Green Bay, Chicago, and Minnesota very well in terms of what's going on day to day there. But, like Green Bay, I don't know how many people predicted them to go to the Super Bowl, but enough were picking them that it was like, oh, okay, this is Green Bay's year. Like, I think it was because of how last year ended in terms of they didn't have Aaron Rodgers for like 6 games and somehow still ended up winning the division. The only problem is their defense has really stalled since that Super Bowl. That Super Bowl, their defense actually looked really good. I mean, I thought it looked really good. They had a lot of young players, and then all of a sudden it kind of looks like San Francisco kind of exposed them all of a sudden, and they can't stop this read option. They just can't stop anybody, it seems like.
It feels like you're right. In 2010, they actually were good, even statistically. I mean, 2010, they were the second best scoring defense in the entire NFL. The only team that had a better scoring defense was the Steelers. So actually, the 2010 Super Bowl was a matchup of the two best scoring defenses. And the Packers actually defensively across the board were good, or at least average or like good, like statistically, and when you looked at it and you thought, okay, they got something here with the defense, but that seemed to have been about it. 2011, they were not good. 2012, they were not good. Last year, they were not good. This year, they're off to a bad start. It kind of feels like 2010 was the last time and maybe the only time that they were good, and I don't know what happened because, yeah, it's like what happened to them? They could shut teams down when they needed to in 2010, and they've not been able to do that since. They've had to rely on shootouts. I don't know what's happened with them, but to be fair, they lost Nick Collins, they lost Cullen Jenkins from that Super Bowl team, but I just think that Dom Capers had that one magical year in terms of creating schemes, and since then it's been anything but. And luckily they've been able to outscore the other opponent to be able to get enough good wins. And last year I just think that division was just filled with bad defenses and was mediocre, but. We'll see if it hurts them this year. I mean, it's not like Chicago and Detroit have looked like defensive juggernauts, and even though the Vikings defenses looked really good, they can't score. So the Packers might just win by default. We don't know,
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they also lost B.J. Raji this year, but B.J. Raji was kind of on the decline, I was reading, so, he came back on a one-year contract.
He was, and they got guys like the Troy Guion and Julius Peppers to make them look good. But those guys are older. I mean, they're Hall of Famers, but they're not Hall of Famers right now. So we'll see. There's still 14 games to go. But, to your point, since 2010, they've looked anything but the team that was the second-best scoring defense in the NFL and won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, so to end this, you're going to go with Green Bay. by
I'm gonna
default,
go
which
Green
I don't
Bay.
blame you for. But I'm going to go with Detroit. I think that their offense is going to be too much. It's a home game, and I think Detroit at least has enough defense, especially on the defensive line. And DeAndre Levy's a really good linebacker. I think he's underrated in terms of
Yeah,
the great
yeah.
linebackers.
And yeah, Detroit's front seven is good enough to at least try to take this game over somewhat. So I can see that, but I'll just go with Green Bay by default.
Yeah. Let's look at San Francisco, Arizona. Another inter division game in the NFC West. Arizona's 2-0. They had a good win against the Chargers, who I actually think is going to go to the AFC Championship. Thankfully, they didn't go 0-2 after last week. They shocked everyone by beating Seattle. And then they beat a bad Giants team, my Giants, but I mean, we can get into that later. I think the Giants are a little better than we think, but we can blame Victor Cruz. Um, and then San Francisco, they're 1-1. They looked on their way to 2-0, and then just completely imploded against Chicago. So I mean, what? I don't really know what to make of this in terms of this game. It's in Arizona. Um, I mean, do you give the nod to Arizona here just because it's at home and they're playing pretty good even despite losing all these players on defense? They're without Darrell Washington, they're without Darnell Dockett. Obviously now they're out without Jonathan Dwyer, and also now they're out without John Abraham, who's been dealing with memory loss and concussion issues, and they just placed on IR.
Yeah, this is a tricky one because I kind of believe that this defense would be just fine even with some of those absences because they still have really good people like Sam Acho and also Carlos Dansby who left in free agency.
Right.
I thought Sam Acho would be just fine. When Tyrann Mathieu gets back, he'll help solidify a secondary that's already really good. I mean, it's not just Patrick Peterson back there who's doing everything. I thought that defense was deep enough to withstand some of this stuff. I think all the NFC West defenses are so deep they can withstand some of this stuff, which has been proven true. The one thing that worries me about Arizona in this game is they don't have Carson Palmer. They're going to have Drew Stanton, and this is a division with the St. Louis, Arizona, San Francisco, and Seattle defenses. You can't have backups because these defenses are so good, as we've seen the last 2 years. If you put in a backup quarterback, I mean, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning look bad against the defenses in this division. How do you think Drew Stanton's going to look?
Yeah.
So that's the one thing I worry about if I'm Arizona is just that what are they going to do with Drew Stanton there? Carson Palmer's not mobile, but at least he's a veteran and at least he can get some things done. That's the one thing I worry about with Arizona is just that if Carson Palmer was there, it'd be more interesting. I think because it's Drew Stanton, I think I might just take San Francisco because of that.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards San Francisco too, and obviously they have their own domestic abuse problems with Ray McDonald, who hasn't been convicted yet or anything. And to be fair, San Francisco is the only team that has been consistent in their, I'm not going to say thinking, but their process in terms of
their process. Yeah, they haven't flip flop.
Right. So they haven't flip flop like any of the other teams, but they also have a lot of injuries too on the defensive end. But I think offensively they're good enough, and I think they'll learn from what happened in Chicago, and I think I'm going to go on board with you and say that they'll also beat Arizona. Before we get to the two bigger games, let's look at Chicago and the Jets on Monday Night Football. We're going to preview Bills, Chargers, and Denver, Seattle as well. Those are kind of, I guess, two more interesting games for the weekend. Chicago and the Jets. The Jets are an interesting team. As much as we'd like to make fun of them for everything they do, just in terms of Rex Ryan and the whole touchdown timeout during the game-tying touchdown and everything like that, they've actually played pretty well, considering the talent they had. They were 8-8 last year, and they really just had nobody. This year they have talent finally. They played Oakland, didn't look that great, but they played against Green Bay. They looked pretty good. And then Chicago, they lose against the Bills, which I don't know what you want to make of it because the Bills are 2-0 and they could be 3-0 after this weekend. And then they look like crap against the San Francisco 49ers, and then all of a sudden one Jay Cutler hit, and Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey are gutting it out, and they steal a win in Levi Stadium in the home opener for San Francisco 49ers. So I don't really know what to make of either team here. Personally, I'm leaning towards Chicago, not just because I picked them, but I think Jay Cutler will take advantage of the cornerback situation in the Jets, which is dreadful. I mean, just terrible. D. Milliner has not looked good. He got torched by Jordy Nelson. Granted, he's great, but he got torched by him. He's dealing with an ankle injury that apparently tightened up on him in the second half last week. And Antonio Allen's a converted safety. It's learning cornerback on the fly. I mean, you had regular cornerbacks in San Francisco. Granted, they're not the best, but they're good enough, and they couldn't handle limping Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. So what do you think the Jets are going to do?
I like that you picked it, that we picked this game too, because you're an AFC East guy, I'm an NFC North guy in terms of what we do for Fox. So we both had the pulse of both sides of this, on either side of this. I think you're right. Look, the Jets last year had no business being 8-8. They should have been 4-12. No one knows that better than you, and better than you who covers the Jets and Jets fans. Right. The only reason they won 8 games was because they really, really liked Rex Ryan and they wanted to play hard for him so he didn't get fired. Which is, I think Rex Ryan is average, but the fact he got 8-8 out of that team, that's really, really good, because that team should have been 4-12. They had no offensive talent whatsoever. Defensively, outside of the secondary, which you're right, the cornerback and safety situation is abysmal, but the front seven situation is anything but. That might be one of the best front sevens in all of football, and quietly one of the best front sevens in all of football. A front seven that a lot of teams would have that gets lost in all the noise and hullabaloo of what else goes around the Jets, which is why I think that they are interesting. They've got that front seven that can really attack you. Rex Ryan, to his credit, his players like him. Geno Smith, I like what I see in Geno Smith, but the receiving core is so bad. I know you guys got Eric Decker, but there's nothing else really there. And the Bears, they're a real Jekyll and Hyde team. You're right. First of all, even in that San Francisco game, they couldn't stop the run. That is an issue that's going to haunt them, and if it continues to haunt them, I don't care how good they look offensively. That's the one issue that can really, really screw them up. And they've been very Jekyll and Hyde, even going back to last year. They've been Jekyll and Hyde in terms of wins and losses, so that's a concern. So, this is another game like Detroit, Green Bay, where both sides are kind of like, you look at them and both sides are like, like you can have them, but if you got to pick one, you got to pick one. And I'm also going to go with Chicago just because offensively they can get themselves out of trouble more than the Jets can. The Jets can't get themselves out of trouble offensively, and the Bears can, so I'll take the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Just covering the Jets. I mean, they do have more talent at wide receiver. It's still pretty bad, but at least they do have Eric Decker. They got rid of Stephen Hill, who was just, I don't even know what he was. He was just a wasted pick. I think they thought he was going to be Calvin Johnson, but, I mean, Calvin Johnson was just really special. He made Reggie Ball look like a freaking All-American, and Reggie Ball couldn't even sniff an undrafted free agent position in the NFL. And I don't know. I mean, I agree with you on all the points you made. Front seven's great. Chicago's rush defense isn't good. It's like, I don't even know what to say. It's like they're looking at mirror images of each other, but like
right.
in different aspects, I guess you would say.
On different sides of the ball, yeah. Exactly.
All right, let's go to the Bills and Chargers. Second to last game here. The Bills are 2-0, shockingly. I mean, I cover the Bills, and everyone is shocked. I mean, I don't know if this has anything or something or like nothing to do with them staying in Buffalo now that Terry Pagula, the Buffalo Sabres owner, is now going to take over as the new owner of the Buffalo Bills, keep them in Western New York. I mean, this whole entire thing, just this offseason with the Bills, Jim Kelly, their owner, dying, Jim Kelly with cancer, and then he's thankfully in remission and he got clean. Not from drug abuse, just from cancer. And, E.J. Manuel looked like he was going to be benched in the first half of the first game because there were reports out, and Schefter said that they have no hesitation about benching E.J. Manuel. They looked awful in the preseason. All of a sudden, they're 2-0 with wins over the Dolphins and Chicago. And then on the flip side, the Chargers lost a really close game to Arizona on Monday night in the second game, and then they come back and have a really impressive victory against Seattle. I mean, this game is in Buffalo. The game is sold out. Do you believe in the Bills? Do you circle the wagons, Adam?
I'm not sure. On the one hand, on the positive side for the Bills, they've been really, really good in this 2-0 stuff. And make no mistake about it, I know the Bears outgained the Bills in that game one, and some people think that that was a fluky win by Buffalo, but I don't. I think the Bears looked terrible. The Bears couldn't get them off the field when they really needed to. And sure, the Bears may have outgained them, but the Bears also got thrashed by their running game and couldn't get them off the field when it mattered and were sloppy, and I don't think they deserved to win that game. In the Miami win, that was impressive. They destroyed Miami. That 29-10 was not nearly that seemed too close for how much they just out-physicaled and essentially physically humiliated Miami, which is another story. Miami's just been average for 15 years. But the Bills, what I like about them is they can run the ball. E.J. Manuel's a little shaky, which scares me, but their defense is really, really good, especially their up front. They can just really get after the passer and shut down running lanes. And I kind of like the way they're coached. Like, there's a lot of things about the Bills that makes me think, maybe not this year, but that they're on the right track, especially if either A.J. Manuel improves or they get somebody else. But the running game and the front, four definitely very, very, very strong and big bright spots for that team for sure. And they have somewhat of a case because San Diego is on a short week and they're going out east, and it's hard for teams coming from the west to the east because when we want to watch the early games out here, it's 10 a.m. for us. So it's 10 a.m. for San Diego. It's not 1 p.m. It's 10 a.m. So that can really screw you up from a time clock standard. So I get that. But San Diego, that loss against Arizona was a very weird loss. They had no business losing that game, and how they handled Seattle, who hadn't lost by double digits in 2 years or something like that. Like all their losses were by 4 points or less until San Diego beat them by 9 or something like that, or 10. I like San Diego, man. I liked them before the season started. I thought that Arizona loss, you could have it. I didn't think that was an indictment on them.
No.
And that Seattle win was so impressive. I think San Diego can get it done. I think the Bills could maybe be 6 or 7 wins, and I believe in them down the road if they clean some of their holes up. But I think for this game, I'll take San Diego just because I really like them. I think they're just really solid, and maybe the best team in the AFC after Denver.
Yeah, the thing for me in this game, actually, and what I'm about to pick is, I guess, a little bit surprising. I'm going to say the Bills win here. I think the momentum helps. Obviously, it's not an end-all, be-all in terms of they're going to win, but I do like this whole momentum thing. It's a very electric crowd, electric atmosphere in the renovated Ralph Wilson Stadium. The only thing that concerns me for the Bills is that Sammy Watkins is still kind of feeling the effects of the rib injury that was bothering him in the preseason, and also Robert Woods was added to the injury report yesterday, and Doug Marrone actually spoke about it. That's kind of how big of a deal it is. So, I mean, that's a little hesitant to me. Imagine how good this defense, though, would be with Kiko Alonso, who was just incredible last year.
Oh yeah. Look, if the Bills beat San Diego and the defense and the running game do well again, maybe I'm not gonna still say, oh, you know what, they'll be 11-5 because we've seen this movie before a few years ago where they started out great. But I will say this, that they're closer to being good than even I thought, because if they can do that to San Diego, then to me it tells me that all they need is to put pieces around that defense and that running game, and they could win the AFC East.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think they found a little niche for C.J. Spiller, making him return kicks, which gets him out in the open, a lot of momentum, an ability to do that, and also it's not making him touch the ball 20, 25 times, which isn't really a style in their offense.
Right.
Also, the reason why I'm picking the Bills is because, like you said, the Chargers are coming off a huge win over Seattle. Granted, Seattle's not great away from home. Seattle's awesome at home. They're 15-1 over the last 2 years, or I guess now 16-1 because they beat the Packers.
16-1, yeah.
But yeah, 16-1. But away from home, they're actually very average. I don't know if you remember this. Last year, they opened up at Carolina, and they only beat them 13-9. So,
right.
Seattle's...
They're a totally different team on the road. Even Russell Wilson's not even as good on the road.
Right, so I think that speaks to the home crowd and everything like that. But bottom line, I think that I do think the Chargers are good. I just worry about the whole West Coast to East Coast thing.
Sure.
And I think the Bills are really feeding off this thing. So last game before we wrap up this podcast. Of course, I didn't mention this before, but you can tweet at all four of us. I'm at Goldieberg. Adam is at Blue Collar God. At Dan Schneier, NFL for Dan. And then at Eddie Pascal with a K for Eddie, who's not here. But let's look at Denver-Seattle. Okay, it's a rematch of last year's blowout in the Super Bowl that just started off terribly and kind of snowballed from there. But this year, they're looking for it to be a little different. It's in Seattle. Like we said, it's just Seattle just has a great atmosphere. And, do you really believe in Denver? Like, how much closer is this game going to be than the Super Bowl? Because it still is in Seattle. Denver's supposed to be better with their defense, but their offense hasn't looked as good, and Denver hasn't actually won as convincingly as they did last year. What's the story there? Which way are you leaning?
This game is so interesting because, Denver made this whole hullabaloo about getting more physical, better defensively, yada yada, which they did. They got DeMarcus Ware, who's going to be a future who is a future Hall of Famer, I should say. They got T.J. Ward, who's a very good player. They got some very, very good pieces on defense that are either future Hall of Famers or good players now. But they also have looked a little sketchy against Indy. Indy almost came back on them. They had a hard time putting away a Kansas City team that's not that offensively talented. The offense hasn't looked good. They've kind of scraped by. They've looked good, but they haven't looked like dominant like they did in stretches last year. And so that's why this game is interesting to me. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, and maybe Denver will win the Super Bowl because they're having to deal with games that are ugly and aren't just blowing everyone out, so they think that they're better than they are. Maybe that is going to be good for them, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's a harbinger of doom because it means that in the playoffs they're going to lose to somebody we never thought. But I'm not going to hold it against Denver if they lose this game to Seattle. Seattle is really good at home. They're not just good at home, they're elite at home. They're elite. They kill everybody. Nobody looks good up there. Nobody. So if Denver gets killed, especially because Peyton Manning's not mobile, so if a mobile guy like Aaron Rodgers can look bad, how is Peyton Manning going to look? If Denver gets killed, I'm not going to hold it against him. That's just what Seattle does. The thing I think would be the most interesting is if Denver loses, but they lose by a field goal, and Seattle isn't just able to run up the score on them out there. If it's a 17-14 win for Seattle, I'm going to look at that and say, you know what, Denver might be better than last year, because if they can lose just 17-14 in Seattle with all that noise, and Peyton Manning doesn't look that bad, then that might be a really, really impressive loss, if you know what I mean. And that might be a loss that we look at and be like, Denver's not as explosive as they used to be, but they're tougher. They're grittier. They can win or lose. They can at least stay in games, and they know how to like hang on with the punches. They don't need it to be 55-10. So that result would be interesting, and I'm going to go the obvious way and lean Seattle because it's at home in Seattle, and for all the reasons I just mentioned, I'm just going to go Seattle.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on everything you said. I'm going Seattle too. I completely agree with the notion that if really Denver, all they have to do for themselves is to show that they can hang with Seattle, especially there, because there is no home environment like the 12th man. And if they can, even if they lose by a touchdown, I think that's really respectable.
I do too.
Seattle is coming off a loss. They're going to be really re-energized. There's all these quotes from Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman saying, before in this Chargers game, apparently they were all exposed by Keenan Allen and stuff, and everyone was saying they weren't as good. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, now I'm committed to winning. Like, because there's that Super Bowl hangover where you think you're a little better than you are, and maybe you are, maybe you aren't. And it goes to the heads of players, and as Bill Simmons kind of has coined, it's the disease of more. So when you win a championship, more players want more money, which means, they're not as focused, they're not as working as hard. So maybe you're seeing that with Seattle. But, I think all Denver has to do is just keep it close. Even if they lose, you gain respect, and you think, let's say, which many people have, let's say they both get to the Super Bowl on a neutral site, you play the same way, maybe that's a win. And
Right.
the one interesting point I just want to say on Seattle Stadium is all these new stadiums are being built. Why aren't they being built by the guy who built the Seattle Stadium? Like, why isn't Atlanta thinking of building their stadium like this? Like, why isn't Minnesota building their stadium like this, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, why aren't they building it so that the crowd's on top of opposing offenses and making them go nuts? I mean, it is really a real advantage. That is no joke. I mean, we don't even have to tell you. Any football fan can just look up the stats for themselves. I mean, especially in the Russell Wilson era, they destroy people. They make everybody there look bad, and the crowd factor is a big thing to do with it. It doesn't matter who you are, New Orleans, Denver, whoever. They just destroy everybody, which is why, as we said, and I think as a lot of football fans think, even if Denver loses, if they lose 27-20 or 14-7 or 17-14 or close by a touchdown or less, that's a really good loss for Denver, because what it shows is Denver's a little closer than we think, because everyone gets hammered in Seattle. So if Denver loses close and they don't get hammered and they don't look as bad as teams can look out there, you're right. When it comes to the Super Bowl, all of a sudden we're going to be more willing to say, well, who knows now? Because it's a neutral field.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll see what happens. Hopefully that's a really great game, because I think we've got 5 really good games that could be, or 5 games that potentially could be really good, and there are a couple others that we were pinpointing and saying, should we talk about it, that could be good, like Philly and Washington, like, Kirk Cousins storyline. Hey, but that's it for us. I mean, hopefully next week we'll have the full slate of all 4 of us back. Hopefully we won't have to talk about domestic abuse anymore, because I think everyone's tired about it. I mean, tired of talking about
2
it.
straight weeks. And I cover the Vikings, so the Adrian Peterson thing has been front and center for me not for 2 weeks, but for like a week and a half, and not to mention the ugliness with Mike Pfeiffer and the Chris Clue stuff. It'd be nice to get away from, like we said, it's important to put this stuff out there, but it'll be nice to get away from some of this bad news, hopefully, by next week.
Yeah, and actually start analyzing the on-the-field product for more than, the day before, and doing it for the whole week. But anyway, that's it for us. Hopefully next week we'll have all 4 of us. You can tweet at us at Goldieberg, at Blue Collar God for Adam, at Dan Schneier NFL for Dan, and then at Eddie Pascal as well. Maybe you can make fun of Eddie and Dan for not being here, even though they both have very good reasons for missing. I just like poking the bear, because that's what I do. So Adam, have a good weekend, and we'll do this again next week.
All right, man. Take care.
All right, you too.